Firstly, thank you, Hayesh, Samaya, organizing all of this. It's been great. And thank you for having me here. This is a huge privilege and honor to be speaking to all of you, and thank you all for being here. So I've been at Google for 4 years. I thought I would try to condense some of the lessons that I've picked up over the years and present them to you all in the hopes that they're useful to you as developers. If you manage other developers, I hope they'll be useful to your teams. Even if you don't manage other developers, I hope you can share these with your teams going forward. Cool, so I'll start with a bit of intro. I wish I could say I was the kid growing up, shuru se bas coding kar rahe hain, like really dead set on a certain path, but I really wasn't. I mean, I was interested in computers. I was interested a little bit in coding and picking up things and breaking them apart. But when I was applying to college, or even when I was in college, I didn't really know that I would computer science karna hai. So, but I was lucky enough to get into Princeton University, which is coincidentally a storied institution in computer science. A lot of big names have been associated with Princeton, either teaching there, studying from there. You must have heard of some of these names, like if you go way back, people like Alan Turing and von Neumann. More recently, people like Tarjan. On the business side of tech, you have Jeff Bezos or Eric Schmidt. All these people went to Princeton, so there's a big culture. The classes were great. I picked up a lot of fundamentals of CS. So I tried other majors. That's the funny thing. I didn't go in as a computer science major. I tried a bunch of things, but it was only when I started taking the computer science classes that I realized that it was fun for me. It was easy for me, which is a good sign that you're passionate about something. And so eventually, I had the chance to work with professors like Kernahan, who wrote the very first book on the C programming language, which was actually the first book that was, you might have seen this, maybe not as relevant anymore, but this was the first ever book on any programming language that became popular since the 70s and 80s. And he happened to be my senior advisor. So going from there, because of those applied fundamentals that Princeton emphasized on, I was lucky enough to land an internship at Google. And from there, I joined full-time in the beautiful city of Seattle, which is in the Northwest. And I recently moved to New York. And as a brief overview of the teams that I've worked in at Google, I'll talk about these a little bit more later, but high level, I started working on cloud supply chain. So this is where we try to optimize the data centers that power cloud, that also power everything else, Google that you know and love, Google, YouTube, Gmail, all of that. So very back-end heavy team over there. I worked at Area 120 for some time, which is an in-house incubator where you can pitch ideas for a startup inside Google, get funded, and you still keep working at Google, but you're running a separate idea or separate team within Google. And then very recently, I switched to labs at Google, which is a new org where we sort of do experimental, cutting-edge technologies and try to figure out applications for these things that are at the forefront. Cool, so I'll jump into the first big lesson that I learned, is that there's a distinction to be made between, and these two things are often confused. Sometimes you can try to develop a very complex coding solution to a problem, and it seems like sometimes it's easy to reward those as well because the complexity of the solution is in front of you. But one thing we're taught and emphasized over and over again, both in terms of your work and how it's rewarded, is that the problem is usually going to be complex if you're solving a worthwhile problem. But the solution can be as simple as possible. You don't need to complicate things. In fact, one of my favorite quotes that I'm sure a lot of you have read this before, you never need to optimize things before you've even started, before you've gotten to a meaningful stage. This applies both to product Don't try to build too many fancy features before you know they're needed. It also applies to when you're in the heart of it, when you're engineering things, perhaps more so to the latter. And just to make this concept a little more concrete, I'll just share a quick personal example. So this is one of the products I was working on in Area 120. And I'll try not to get into the product too much, but just talking about this particular feature, what we were trying to do was to build a creator platform where online content creators can bring in all of their products that they have on different platforms. So they have stuff on Shopify, on Etsy, and Teachable. We wanted to build some place where they could just import all of them. And we thought of different ideas of doing this, like from a product standpoint. It was, maybe let's do some API integrations, or maybe there's a lot of data in Google Shopping, like the Google Merchant Center. Let's try to use that data, etc. But as we were talking about this, me and some of the engineers, we worked with the PMs and designers to start prototyping what it would look like to just use the metadata that's present in all of those web pages to try to reconstruct the product. Essentially keep it as simple as possible. So we did that prototyping, and just using Open Graph and schema.org metadata that's present in most sort of product web pages, we were able to get a pretty good representation of what the actual product was. And this took like a 1/10 of the time that developing the whole solution would have taken. And in fact, it was good enough that we actually went ahead and launched it as our MVP, and it did really well. Creators loved the simplicity. They just had to paste a URL, and we would create a very good representation of their product on a different platform in this new platform, which would combine all of their data and then send it over to YouTube and other Google surfaces, but I won't get into that right now. Cool. Lesson number 2, blameless postmortems. How many people here have heard of postmortems in a software context? Okay. Not a lot of people. I expected a little bit more, but that's good. There's a lot to unpack here. High level, and I think there was a very detailed talk on this earlier in the day. I caught a bit of that. This is also taken from the SRE handbook, which is a public document. A postmortem is where something goes wrong. Something will always go wrong. You document what happened. You document what impact it had. You write out what were the steps you took to fix it. And then you try to get to the root cause of that problem. And then you list out what the actions are going to be in the future to avoid this problem from recurring again. And the important thing here is not just the postmortem, it's the blameless part of it. And that is something that's ingrained in the culture at Google very, very firmly. And I believe, this is from my perspective, but I think there's no other way to do postmortems or build a strong culture without having this blameless aspect of it. What it means is essentially that things go wrong, things will always go wrong. When it does go wrong, it's the system that is at fault, not who wrote the system, who was on call at the time. And what you get out of this, what you get out of a good, blameless postmortem, is that you will get a healthier team and you'll get a stronger system. Because when everyone knows that it's a blameless culture, you are more open to sharing your ideas. You're more open to sharing what went wrong without any sense of retribution. And again, just to go over both the key tenets and also a personal example in there. These are the high-level qualities of a good postmortem. It should obviously be timely. You should do it very soon after the incident so that you remember all the details that happened. And this should always be a good document that's reviewed by other people, not just something you share in a meeting. You can have a meeting after writing it, but this should be a documented record, because you might leave the company, but the learnings will remain. A good postmortem should also be thorough. So this is probably the most important thing. It's very easy to even if you decide to do a postmortem, to just look at the first reason of something going wrong and leave it at that. We're taught to ask the question why at least 5 times when looking at what happened. So it's like peeling the layers of an onion, almost. So for example, my first time that I was on call on a backend system, things went down. So the service literally crashed the first time I was on call. And I was responsible for doing the postmortem because it's a standard policy. And I knew about the postmortem culture and policy, but I was still a little bit freaked out. Like, why am I responsible for doing this? But I learned so much through that process. I really started to value what this means for the company and what this means for a strong engineering culture. In this particular case, the service went down because of high QPS. So that's like the first layer of why the service went down, high QPS. You peel that a little bit, and then we realized, well, one reason is because we aren't sending the right error code. So clients are like resending their requests even though we can't serve them. That's the obvious reason there. But then we also realized that the database writes that we were trying to do on that call were running out of memory. It's also easy to stop there. Like, okay, maybe we'll increase the memory and this won't happen again. But we tried to dig deeper. So why was the database running out of memory so quickly? And it turns out that there was a manual process that runs once every few weeks from some consultants in India. They need to do something on the database. And it happened to run at the exact same time where all these requests were piling up and caused this confluence of factors. So this is where we peeled one layer deep. Like, why was that manual process running at all? And it turns out that we were supposed to automate it a few months ago. There was a task to do that automation. It just never got prioritized. But now we know that that particular decision led to this failure. That doesn't mean anyone was at fault. It's just that we decided to do things in a certain way, and that led to this failure. And now that we've peeled all the layers of the onion, so-called onion, like now we know what happened. And we can choose to prioritize that automation, that back job, so that the manual job isn't needed, so something like this doesn't happen again. A good blameless postmortem is also reflective. You try to look at what went well in this particular case, like where did we get lucky in solving this particular issue, so that maybe there were some things, maybe like the right person who knew what command to run happened to be on call, and they knew what to do. But maybe that won't happen next time. So like, let's also record what went well, what went poorly, and where did we just get lucky in this case. And a good postmortem always has action items. It's pretty useless without saying what exactly we're going to do as a result of this, and it's important to prioritize those fixes as a leadership team, as a developer team, and maybe more for like inculcating team culture. It's also very important to reward good postmortems, to shout out good postmortems, because it's very easy to give shout outs to launches and releases, but this is as important for making sure that your service is running well. Cool. Number 3, very important, I think, throughout my journey at Google. I've tried out so many different things here, and I've always been picking up the next big thing. Like a lot of people ask if I specialized in a particular stack, and that's not really the case. I've tried to pick up whatever was needed for that particular role, and that served me really well. I think most successful ICs that I've seen have this knack of like just picking up something, running with it. And you don't need to become the ultimate expert in every single thing, but you know enough to be able to code really well there. And in this particular case, another thing that helped me was the concept of 20% time at Google, which is essentially that whatever team you're on, you have the ability to spend 20% of your time doing something else. That's not related to your core work. In this case, when I was in this cloud backend team where I was doing a lot of servers talking to each other, optimization, backend heavy stuff, I also realized I wanted to do something more consumer facing, like an app or something, and this was during COVID. So for 20% of my time, I picked up this project that looked interesting in Area 120, which was the creator-focused startup that I was talking about earlier. And it turned out to be so interesting that I actually decided to go full-time at some point. And then after a couple years of working on this cloud backend stuff, I was suddenly trying to write code in Dart. I was trying to manage some front-end engineers. I was trying to, other things that we'll get to later, but basically there was a complete shift in perspective. And I learned a whole lot from that experience, which I wouldn't have got into if I was just like laser focused on growing in my specific team and specific role. So this might not work for everyone, but I personally think like moving around teams, moving around companies even is usually going to be good for your career, and good for you to keep fresh. We've talked about AI a lot recently. Like that is something that I think also falls into this bucket. Keep your skills fresh instead of just going too deep into one thing. And some of the stuff that I did at Area 120 then directly led to my new role, which is Labs at Google, where we do a lot of cutting edge emerging technologies, a whole variety of those. Number 4, and I think all the other lessons kind of lead to this one. As a developer, your role is not confined to coding the solution. It extends far beyond that. Again, like most successful ICs at Google that I've seen take ownership of their entire product. You should have the ability to influence your product before it's designed and after it's launched and it goes to market. And even if you're not directly influencing the strategy, you'll have a lot to learn. And your peers from other functions will also have a lot to learn from you. And when you establish these relationships, you'll have a better understanding of where your company, where your product fits in the market. And you'll be able to give better suggestions and ideas and thoughts on what needs to be done next. And just to close this out with one last example from the field. So on the Area 120 startup that I was working on, one of our beta testers was a creator. She was an online musician, made soundtracks and sold her stuff online. She was a beta tester, and she was really passionate about the product. So at some point when we had an opening, we actually hired her to our team. And because of her passion, she actually formed a core part of our team eventually, to the degree that we, like all the developers, there were 3 or 4 developers, all the PMs, we started developing this culture of really sharing a lot of information on everything, every new feature that we were thinking of. There was a lot of, it's definitely a two-way street. I would have conversations where I would learn a lot about things that our customers want, and vice versa. She would figure out what is possible. And within a year, we were able to launch so many things and make them really, really take off, all because we were all working as one unit, as one team, and that really inculcated this belief that whatever you're doing as a developer, make sure that you're not ignoring what's happening in your product. And go-to-market and UX and design, all of these functions, QA as well, they all come together to make sure that you're having a great time and you're learning lots and you're keeping your skills fresh. And that is it. This is a quick summary of the lessons.